Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Monday, July 13th, 2026. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. On today's episode, in our box office segment, we'll hear from Rebecca Rubin on Disney's Misstep with its Moana live-action remake, and then we'll hear from John Erwin, the filmmaker behind Young Washington. That's the indie biopic from Wonder Project that opened pretty big for an indie over the July 4th weekend. But before we get to all of that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. The big story of the morning is that the state attorneys general made good on their promise to file suit to stop Paramount Skydance's acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery. California's AG, Rob Bonta, is leading the charge from the state AG's point of view. This deal is anti-competitive and anti-consumer. It will raise prices and lead to less content overall, not more. Paramount, in its response, says that this is just dead wrong. Paramount, in a lengthy statement, said that the argument laid out in the state AG's complaint, quote, distorts settled antitrust law and is based on a misrepresentation of competition in the entertainment industry today, end quote. This isn't over. We'll hear from Variety's Gene Mattis and another expert in this field on Tuesday's episode of Daily Variety. In the meantime, Mattis and my great colleague Todd Spangler have written no less than 4 smart stories this morning to help industry insiders unpack what all of this means. R.I.P. Sam Neill. What a terrific actor. There are many tributes flowing in to the New Zealand native who died today at the age of 78. And finally, don't miss my colleague Stephen Horowitz's write-up of the Jay-Z concerts from this weekend in New York. The shows were epic and long, and so is Horowitz's reportage on where this music giant stands at this point in his life. All of these stories and so much more can be found on Variety.com right now. And now it's time for conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. If it's Monday, we're talking box office with Variety's Rebecca Rubin. This weekend, Moana got off to a slow start, and Lionsgate's Michael Jackson biopic passed a big milestone. Rebecca Rubin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Rebecca, let's dive right in. Moana, the live-action remake. You have written so smartly about Disney and their strategy around these. How did this one fare in its opening weekend?
I think it's safe to say Moana disappointed. It opened to $43 million, which was way behind projections. Heading into the weekend, Disney was anticipating a start closer to $60 to $65 million, and this is one of the lowest debuts in terms of Disney's live-action remakes. It's in the company of Snow White, which opened to $42 million, and that film left theaters as a big box office bomb. And so if Moana is floating a similar trajectory, it could be a big problem for the studio.
These Disney live-action remakes of animated classics have really sparked a lot of debate, and our very own chief film critic Owen Gleiberman wrote really smartly. He really liked this Moana. He overall gave it a positive review, said it was a lot of fun, had a lot of that infectiousness of the original animated feature, but he did discuss that it's a genre that, does this need to exist? That is kind of the central question, and I also have to believe that as they ask that question, they're also going to ask, do these things need to exist at a $250 million production budget?
Absolutely, because when you look at something like Lilo and Stitch, the live-action remake that opened last summer, it was a huge hit. It made $1 billion, but it was produced for just $100 million. Obviously, that's a lot of money, but compared to some of these other tentpoles, that's pretty modest of a budget and means it was all that more profitable for the studio. And so if Moana had also cost around $100 million, I think we would be having a very different conversation. But with a budget that's $250 million, it needs to make around $600 million globally to justify that price tag. And it's pretty unrealistic to assume it's going to get anywhere near that number. And there's a ton of theories as to what is going on with these Disney live action remakes. And I think one of the problems really is the timing. I think this kind of underscores the fact that there is such a thing as too soon. I think with something like Snow White, that was a very old property and it didn't have the same resonance with today's audiences. But even though Moana is extremely popular, the movie came out a decade ago, which you'd think would be enough time to build nostalgia. I think the problem is that they had the animated sequel less than 2 years ago, which was a huge success. It made over $1 billion. And so I think people felt like they had just seen this.
So this was pretty disappointing news from the box office for Disney, but boy, Toy Story 5 and those gigantic numbers probably helped take some of the sting off of it. How's Toy Story 5 doing? Let me see if I remember right. Weekend 4?
Correct. Yeah, Disney is having a pretty up and down summer, I think. Toy Story 5 is definitely helped softening the blow for Moana. Toy Story 5 made $18 million over the weekend, and that brings its grosses to over $400 million domestically and almost $900 million worldwide. And so this film should soon surpass the $1 billion mark, and it's on track to be the highest grossing entry in this property. And that's pretty significant because there are very few animated franchises with 5 installments.
Well, speaking of $1 billion, you reported that Michael, the Lionsgate biopic that just won't quit, has hit the $1 billion mark, which is really astounding.
What's so remarkable about the success of Michael is that no other studio wanted to make this film. They felt like it was too controversial to make a film about Michael Jackson, and so the fact that they were able to deliver a movie that is such a clear crowd pleaser just really speaks to what audiences, I think, want to see in theaters. And this movie didn't get into a lot of the controversial aspects of Michael Jackson's life, and it focused a lot on his greatest hits and his concert performances and music videos, and that seems to be what audiences want from these musical biopics. And so it's the first biopic to ever make $1 billion, and it had a few weeks ago already surpassed Bohemian Rhapsody as the highest grossing musical biopic, and then Oppenheimer as just the highest grossing film based on a real person. But it's also, as you mentioned, Lionsgate, the studio's biggest film of all time and its first movie ever to reach $1 billion. So just all around a very successful film, and I think surpassing everybody's expectations for what this film could earn.
Wow, not even the Hunger Games? None of the Hunger Games films made it to $1 billion?
Right. The highest grossing film before this for Lionsgate was Hunger Games Catching Fire, which made $865 million. And the second highest grossing film before this was The Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2 with $850 million. And so this really blew those two films out of the water.
Okay, Rebecca, here's my hardest question for you. Next weekend, what are you seeing in the tracking for Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey?
This is the big question of the summer. How big is The Odyssey going to be in its opening weekend? And right now it's looking like the debut will be around $85 million to $90 million. And what we're seeing in tracking right now is there's a huge interest in IMAX, which is no surprise. But what'll be interesting to see is if people can't get a ticket to see it in IMAX, are they just going to wait and get a ticket when they can? Or are they going to get a standard ticket and then try to see it in IMAX at another time? So I think that will sort of be the distinguishing factor of whether it gets to $100 million in its opening weekend. But even so, I think 85 to 90 million for a movie like this is pretty significant.
I cannot wait. I'm very excited to see how it's received. Rebecca Rubin, thank you as always for doing the analysis and walking us through the numbers.
Thank you for having me.
And now we'll hear from John Erwin. Erwin is one of the founders of Wonder Project, a studio that is devoted to delivering movies and TV shows that are rooted in a foundation of faith and purpose. Erwin calls it things worth believing in. Here we talk about the strong opening weekend for Wonder Project's Young Washington. We also talk about how this startup company is making the theatrical business work for them at this tumultuous time in the industry. After a little over a week in theaters, Young Washington has grossed about $33 million on a budget of just under $20 million. John Erwin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, John, congratulations times two are in order. First of all, last week you had a very solid opening for your indie film, Young Washington, a biopic of the formative years of the father of our country. Pretty good timing. It was quite a July 4th this year. And then this just minutes before we started recording, I saw the good news that House of David, the Wonder Project Amazon series, is renewed for season 3. Wonder Project and the work you've done have just been an incredible story of entrepreneurialism, enterprise, determination, and purpose. So let's start by talking about Young Washington. Last weekend on Friday night and Saturday night, when you started to see the returns, you must have just been overjoyed.
Oh, it was a wonderful weekend. And I would add to your list of characteristics, naivety should be in the mix. Sometimes it's just best not knowing how hard the things you're setting out to do are, but just believing fully in them. And Wonder, the goal is just to tell stories that restore faith in things worth believing in. And I just wanted to write a love letter to America for our 250th anniversary. It's kind of a singular moment in our lifetimes. And I had gotten obsessed with the story of the American Revolution. It started about a decade ago. I could not get into Hamilton. It was sold out. I was in New York working. And I think by raging against that injustice, I finally did see the play many times. I started reading books. I'm like, I'll read all the books that it was based on. So I started with Chernow's Hamilton, then his Washington, and then I just got thoroughly obsessed with the story of the American Revolution. And so I found this unknown, by and large, chapter in Washington's life when he was younger, but that defined the character. And so I thought this would be a great way to start telling America's story, telling the story of the revolution. Let's start with the origin story of our first founder. And I'm so grateful to have been able to make this movie.
How did you market this film? How did you get the word out to moviegoers to get the kind of response that you had?
Well, for many years, we have gone around the country and just forged some great relationships with people. So I guess you'd call grassroots marketing over the course of many years. And as we've made our films, we just formed great relationships. And so this is certainly, we screen the film all over the country at presidential libraries and universities and churches. And we take the time to take the film out. But we also have a very loyal group of people at the local level that just support our movies. And I'm so grateful to the audience that keeps shocking the system. And then certainly on this one, we partnered with Angel Studios. And I think that they're just a bunch of disruptive rebels and in middle America, the guys, people like us that just don't know what can't be done. And so they go do it. And I will say that they're incredible performance marketers, and they have a real gift at connecting products to audiences digitally very efficiently. They're very, very good at championing a film digitally. And so that kind of nitroglycerin worked on this film. We did what we did with grassroots marketing, and then Angel, they have their guild, which is now past 2 million people, which is people that I'm a member of the Angel Guild, where people vote on the content that gets made, and people feel a great sense of loyalty to this idea of a movie studio that is of the people, by the people, and for the people, I guess is a fitting illustration.
John, from the bottom line sense, how is movies as a business for Wonder Project? Are you able to make it work with the budgets that you have to work with and the kind of margins that you can receive?
Yeah. Yes, you can. It's I like this Orson Welles quote, "The absence of limitation is the death of creativity." So we made the movie for under $20 million, and that's what we did in our opening weekend.
Exactly. So you did just about 20 in your opening weekend, which is pretty darn
more.
Good.
Anytime you do as much or more than your movie costs in your opening weekend, you tend to sleep well that weekend. But I think that embracing the creativity in making films, cheaper and more efficiently, I think a lot of what becomes theatrical profitability is how much the film costs to make, and then how efficient you can be in marketing the movie. And so, yes, it is a business that still has risk, but I think that we found a model that really works. We build the movies to break even at a very realistic number based off our history, so that when films do overperform like this, they tend to be very profitable. And in this case, I hope that it leads to to more stories of the American Revolution. That has been the dream of mine. And so it seems that's going to happen.
This is such a great example of independent, not from the Hollywood mainstream, independent activity. What's been the reception like from the major exhibitors? Do you feel like you've had a welcome reception?
One of the best things we did on I Can Only Imagine, which was our first breakout hit. We built it to break even at 15 million. It did 86 million. And we went around not only the country to show it to people in churches and in schools and colleges, but we really sat with the exhibitors. We sat with AMC and Cinemark, Regal, Malco. And these are middle American companies as well. And we had such great collaboration and ideas to the point where I try to contractually solidify that I test my movies. There's this certain theater that's just off Cinemark's headquarters. It's their kind of mothership theater. And it's like my lucky theater to test. And I try to always test there. But that's just because we've had such great interactions with them. And I think the death of the movie-going experience is highly overrated. And I just think we have such a need to gather. And for Washington, young Washington specifically, it is a different experience at home. There's something about watching it on a big screen with people. And there's a lot all over America, people cheering at the end or people chanting USA at the end. Well, there's no politics involved in it. It's just a celebration of the American story. And we're all owners of that story together. So I found exhibitors really open and interested in anyone that can gather an audience, obviously, but also how do we surprise and delight moviegoers everywhere.
I can hear exhibitors cheering when they hear this. Let me ask you, how has the experience been for your young star? I know he's a relative newcomer. This must have been quite a week for him.
William Franklin Miller. I love taking a risk on a new actor. We did it with Michael in House of David. I could not be more proud of him. And then William, we auditioned hundreds of people for Washington, and it was always about finding an unknown for the young Washington role and then casting imputed worth around him. And it's the best cast I've ever worked with. It's the EGOT cast all surrounding William. And I just felt like he had this sense of grit and dignity and gravitas that is almost unteachable. And he's just a good kid. But also, Washington was not loud. Washington had a presence, and he changed a room when he entered it. And that's what I was looking for. And something about William, you're just drawn to him. He's a natural leader, and he has a natural presence. And this is his first major role in a film. My daughter, she's like, there's a ton of TikToks that are basically sexy Washington TikToks that I'm like, well,
you're making an impact
historically.
That's how you're making an impact.
But he carries it well. I really think he just does a thoroughly wonderful job in the film. I'm very proud of him.
John, again, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Really, congratulations on all your success.
Well, thank you so much. And what a wonderful time to be in our business.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. This past weekend was an incredible one for sports fans between the Wimbledon finals and the quarterfinals of the World Cup. Viewership of the World Cup has stayed strong even with Team USA being out of competition. This all bodes well for the big finish on July 19th with the final game at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. The other big event on the entertainment calendar this week is the arrival of The Odyssey. The conditions at the box office are ripe. Can Christopher Nolan do it again? We'll find out starting Friday. Before we go, congrats to Guillermo del Toro and Aaron Sorkin. Those two multi-hyphenates will receive honorary doctorates of fine arts from the American Film Institute. The honors will be bestowed on August 7th as part of the AFI's graduation ceremony at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Rebecca Rubin. Sticks, nicks, hick picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety.